Go ahead.
Hey, good day, everybody. Welcome back to our newly titled "Working Together" with live with Rabbi Karmi Ingber. We decided to change the name from the Strategic Alignment Events to "Working Together." Just trying to keep things positive and ensure that we're all working together. So we're waiting on Rabbi Ingber, but let's just jump in and see. We're joined on Rod Bryan of Nativ's Zoom room. Rod, you're live on the No Hide World Center. How you doing? How's everything down in Texas?
Man, everything is fantastic. As a matter of fact, while we speak, so far coming into the room is the rabbi. He'll be here fully in live color in a minute. But we have Ronald in Australia. Join us. Atalo, where are you joining us from so we can remember again?
He's in Lima, Peru.
Lima, Peru. So we have Ross in Kingwood, Texas, Sandy in Kingwood, Texas, and then, of course, I'm here in Humble, Texas. So we're all over the place. Thank you guys for tuning in. And I really like the title change. The whole idea of, making things happen, coming together to unify and to work for a common goal, and that is to bring the knowledge of Hashem to the world. And I'm so excited because so many people are coming to the Torah and to embrace it as non-Jews. It's an amazing time of our life, and it just goes to demonstrate how far into or closer to the Messianic redemption we can be. And so I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Ingber if you're ready to go. You're muted.
Hi, everybody. Is Dan here?
Oh, yes. We're already introduced and on live. We're streaming.
Okay, wonderful. All right, welcome, everyone. Good to have you all here. Actually, Dan, is there a way to not to see my screen next to your screen? It's very
well. What you're seeing is what I'm broadcasting.
I know. I'm 1 second behind, so I'm watching myself.
Okay, so
you
Rabbi,
you got the echo delay.
Rabbi, here's the solution. Go to where your options are at the very top right-hand corner. It says view.
Yeah.
And switch to speaker.
Okay.
You should be only seeing you right now, correct?
Well, I'm only seeing you, but if I talk, I'll see myself, I guess.
Correct. You will. And I'm muting my mic, so you won't see me after this.
All right. We'll try like this. All right. Still seeing you, which is a very nice sight. I'm happy to see you always, Rod. You know that. You know what? I'll deal with it. Forget it. Because what I want to do today, I'm just going to just put this regular. Here's what I want to do today, everybody. One second. Give me one more second just to get my thing here set up. 1 second. Gallery. Okay, I'm just going to deal with it. All right. Welcome, everyone. This is what I want to do today. A little different. There is a really important principle that it goes through everything in life. A person is only able to receive what we're open to get. And it's like, imagine a person who's very haughty, they think they know everything. They can't learn anything because they know everything. Same thing in relationships. For example, a husband and wife, there's something called the chukka, the yearning, and then the fulfillment. A husband comes home and he gives his wife flowers. It's only meaningful when there is a yearning on the other side. And that's the way all information is transmitted. It has to be a vessel to receive it. The more we make ourselves vessels, the more then God fills us up. That's the way the world works. The truth is, from Hashem's perspective, so to speak, he's always giving. It's just, are we able to receive? Now, this idea is relevant for what we're doing also. It's very challenging today. It's great, as Rod said before, where we have people from across the globe. This is unbelievable. The problem is that you want to know who we're speaking to. We want to know each other. We want to be able to know what people's needs are, not to speak into a computer, rather to speak to people. So what I wanted to do today is I wanted to open it up more to hear your questions, your thoughts. And that way I will hopefully have the ability to gear what it is that you want to hear or that you need to know about to whatever motivates you, to whatever excites you, to whatever you're yearning for. So, excuse me, sorry. So today we're going to go a little bit more into a free-flowing discussion. I'm going to throw out a few ideas to start, but it's going to be very general, and I want you to feel free to ask your questions, have your comments, and I'm just going to start with one short little intro, and then I'm going to let you take it away and start the conversation from the side of the student as opposed to the teacher, who can sometimes talk and talk, but needs to be able to have the students who want to receive. So the thing I'm going to start with is just an overview. In the overview of reality, the world is moving towards perfection. Okay? Everything that we experience, we think the world is controlled by this person, that person, it's Putin, it's this one, it's that one, and we lose track of the deeper lying principle. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. God is one. There is one source that runs everything, and there are no other powers, as we mentioned last week. That's idolatry. Any power, any belief, there's any power fighting God is idolatry. So therefore, our life experience, and this is the most amazing thing, in the end of this 6,000 years of history we're going through right now, we're all going to turn around and say, wow, because every single thing that you thought was the world out of control was not, was all being directed while giving us free will. Like imagine you meet a guy who's really smart and you're amazed how smart the person is. Okay. And you know, they're smarter than me. Okay. Now imagine a different situation where a person thinks they're really smart and they think they're outsmarting this other guy. They're playing chess or whatever it is. And at the end, the person realized that every move he made was being incorporated by the chess master to get him to exactly where he wanted to go. Then you're like, oh my gosh, there was no battle here. It wasn't like we're about to come into Passover. It wasn't like, God was stronger than the Egyptians. That's foolish. God gave the Egyptians, Pharaoh the free will, and he moved the world to where he wanted it to be. And that's the reality. And then when you realize that, you realize there are no other powers. There is no other source. God runs the world and he has a purpose. And now this is the part I want us to focus on today. We all want a part in this purpose, right? That we want to be a reflection of the divine. We want to have a part in this world. And what is our role in God's grand plan? That's what we're living with. That's what we're every day trying to understand and trying to make our lives make sense by saying, this picture is so great. I don't know where it's going yet. I have an idea, but I want to be part of it. And therefore, now that I shifted to the discussion of you all, of where your role is going to be, where our role is going to be, I want to open it up to your questions about either things in the world that you don't understand, whether it's how many days of creation, is it 6 days or is it 20 billion years? From anything from that to what's going on in politics, in world pictures, in specifics, just to feel free to allow you guys to ask where you're at to try to help us understand our role in the divine plan that is unfolding. That's my
awesome point, Rabbi. You know, this week on my Rocky Mountain Readings broadcast, we started a book called Everyday Holiness, and it's just straight out Musar by a gentleman named Alan Marinas. But early in the book, he gave a wonderful definition for humility, and he described it as occupying the right amount of space. So humility is not taking more space than you are, but also for those that are withdrawn, making sure that they're taking up the space they should be. I have a tendency with a lot of the audience I seem to reach where people are always looking to step out more, like you're mentioning. Where's that place for them? How can they do it and still remain humble? You know, step into, especially for a lot of people that are, say, introverted and they have difficulty stepping forward. How can they do that and break, say, the fear of moving into who Hashem would have them be in this world?
Great, beautiful question. That's a great question. I want to try to answer you the way you put it, because you put it really in a beautiful dynamic. Humility and the sense of, you know, in every self-help book, you could be the person to save the world. Okay, great. You know, I was like, yeah. I remember one of my rabbis used to always talk about when God appeared to Moses at the burning bush. He said, if God came to you at the burning bush and said, you're the one to save the people, we'd all be like, I knew it. I knew deep down I was special. You know? Moshe says, no, not me. So let's talk about this because it's very bizarre. Moshe is the most humble person ever in history. As the verse says, Ish Moshe Anavad Mod. He is most humble. No one as humble as Moshe. Now, at the same time, it says in the text that Moshe, when he came down from Mount Sinai, he had to wear a mask because light was exuding from his face, right? The old mistake of Michelangelo, right? What is the canard?
Horns, yeah.
Have horns? Because it says carne or, beams of light were coming out from his head. But the word Karen also could mean a horn, so Michelangelo didn't have a good translation, so that hence the canard that we Jews have horns, because Moshe had beams of light. He had beams of light, meaning his soul was so overcoming his body that it was shining out.
Translucent, yeah.
Right. And he was therefore people couldn't even look at it. So now, there's the question, I'm going to rephrase Dan's question. How can you be so humble when you know you're the only person who could talk to God whenever you want? You have beams of light coming out of your face. There will be no prophet ever as great as Moshe. You said it before, even the Mashiach, he will not be as great as prophet as Moshe. And that is very crucial, as you understand, those of you who have been, you know, certainly exposed to other religions. I said a few weeks ago, the greatest, most bizarre thing is that the Torah says it can never change. And so therefore, no one could change it. So when Moshe, the Torah says, Lo kam Moshe, there'll be no prophet, Navi, there'll be no prophet like Moshe again. That's crucial in the system. Because if theoretically a prophet could come that was bigger than Moshe, he would say, oh, I have a new idea. But that can't be, because the Torah says that won't happen. It's impossible. God created it. Even Mashiach will not be as great as Moshe in terms of prophecy. So how are you the most humble person? How's it possible? I'll share with you another story. This happens in the Talmud. The Talmud is recording cases of when certain rabbis died, certain traits died in the world. Certain traits were lost. And then they say when so-and-so rabbi died, the trait of humility was lost in the world. And then one rabbi piped up and said, excuse me, you forgot about me, Mr. Humility himself? And they said, oh yeah, you're right. We forgot. You're the most humble person. Now that's bizarre, obviously, because all of us understand the guy who says he's the most humble is generally not the most humble person. So what is we misunderstand humility altogether. I'm going to give you two definitions of humility. And both of them, I think, will hopefully answer your question there. So the reason why Moshe is the most humble is like this. Let's start out basics. You got people today, they're movie stars, they're sports figures, and therefore they've decided that they have the wisdom to tell you how to live your life because he could put a ball into a hoop. So therefore they must have this tremendous insight. Now, these people, the beautiful people, the stars, celebrities, they go through their lives, and very often they're very, very haughty. I'm a big shot. So I always start to think, wait a minute, I understand. You're a very beautiful person. Did you make yourself beautiful? No. How in the world could someone become haughty because they're beautiful? They didn't make themselves beautiful. If someone's very smart, how can they be haughty about being smart? They didn't make themselves smart. Where is it possible to become haughty in a real normal sense? It's when I built myself. I did something. I said, I made this. Moshe, as he became greater and greater, he understood God gave this to him. Who gave you hands? Who gave you a head? Who gave you the ability? Who gave you everything? And therefore, Moshe, as he becomes greater and greater, he realizes that everything he is what God grants to him. Nobody made themselves. We didn't make ourselves. The deepest part of ourselves, our soul, is the aspect that God gave us to be an expression of godliness in the world. So the question is the opposite. How in the world could a person be haughty when everything we are is what we've been given? And that's why Moshe and this rabbi in the story is so humble, because he realizes that, yes, I may have great skills, but that just makes me owe more. That makes me have to do more because God gave me the tools to do more. And that's really the one of the roots of humility, is to realize the more you are, the more you become, is the gift you're getting to express something. And this is really the point you said before, Dan, which is now I can feel great about that. So God gave me these skills and he wants me to do something with them. So how do I take credit for it? It's like, a person goes and, builds a beautiful, life-size doll. And he breathes life into it. The doll says, I'm the greatest thing in the world. I just made you. What do you mean? So when you realize that God gave us all the qualities that we have, even the ability to make them ourselves, that's from his giving to us, so we can never feel that we're greater, because I am what it is that I am as a gift to be this. And that's really how a person...
Recording in progress.
That's also really why a person should feel great on the other side about doing more. Like there's an idea that if you have skills and you don't use them, you're actually doing a sin. There's a story like that in the Talmud also. This guy, and he had a great voice and he didn't use it, and he could have brought people to the temple with his great voice. That means that when I have a great voice, so I could say, wow, I got the great voice, or I could be smart and say, wow, God gave me a great voice to do this with. And therefore, knowing who you are, and even knowing you're great, is not a contradiction to humility. I know I have these talents, and I know it's great because God gave it to me as a gift. That is the first system of humility. It's because, yes, I could be as great as I could possibly be. That's the gift. And therefore, I have to become that, not because I take credit for it, because I didn't make myself. That's the first idea of humility. Let me get some questions on that, and I'll tell you the second idea of humility first. Does that make sense to everybody first?
First of all, Rabbi, brilliant. Can you hear me okay? I want to make sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting aspect of that. When we talk about Moshe being so humble, if you are that close to the Blessed One, and where you can speak panim panim, face to face, it's just going to happen. It's like your ego is so suppressed in that environment. You have to be that humble. Now, maybe if you or I could be that close, we would be the same. But the point is, we're not. He is. So that's something I wanted to bring up. Second thing I want to ask is a question. We talk about the ability of humanity to, or for us to be able to affect the world that we live in. And so the common theme we have here at Nativ, I can't change the world, but I can change me, right? And then at the same time, we know there's a collective aspect that, if all the people that are part of this network do introspection and elevating ourselves to a higher level, that we can have effect. But where do you think the individual versus collective idea, what has the greater impact, or does it matter? It just means that we should be concerned about ourselves.
Okay, so let me deal with both points. The first point you said is really very important, because it's kind of how I started this session today, which is the reason why God spoke to Moshe, as you said, panim face to face, was because Moshe was the most humble. It went the opposite. In other words, it says a person that's haughty chases God out of the world, because I can't receive when I think I know everything.
Right.
So the fact that Moshe saw the world in this way, that led to more and more of Hashem's relationship to him, because he didn't take the credit. The more I take the credit, the more I got disconnected from God, because now I pushed God out of the reality that he really has to be in, because he's the one who gave it to me. And where do you see this in the opposite? You see by Bilam. Because Bilam was a very powerful man. He was a prophet. He was a prophet of the nations, but he really shouldn't have gotten the prophecy. He was given it for various reasons. Various reasons he was given prophecy, but he actually used it to make himself more haughty. Said, "Oh, see, God's talking to me." So a person who really earns the state of not taking and saying, I am this, but I've been given this, that person is able to get more and more communication with Hashem. And that's the Moshe story. Bilam, who is given it, uses it actually for the opposite. So you're right. More seeing, there was a great statement once. One of the Mussar rabbis said, if Darwin had ever seen Viswal Salanter, who's this great rabbi, if you ever seen him, he would know we can't come from monkeys.
Yeah.
It was a great statement, but the thing is, if you see certain people, yes, that puts you in context. I mean, I imagine you heard the leading sage of Israel passed away and was buried today. I don't know if you heard of Chaim Kanievsky's song. If you ever would see one of the great sages of Israel, then you do get a certain amount of humility, hopefully, because it's normal to see then yourself in context. So the first point you're saying is very fascinating. It's true, but you have to understand that Moshe's humility is what brings to him the more of the communication. Now, as far as individual and collective, and here it's also Jews have a certain quality, Noachide have a certain quality. The idea of starting with yourself, starting with your community is crucial, because you can change the world by starting with yourself. Making the change in myself will affect people, depending on many aspects of the soul, how much of a ripple effect it will create, but it will create a ripple effect. And therefore, you got to start with yourself. Someone who tries to fix other people up before fixing themselves it will not go well. So it has to start with every individual. And that's, by the way, in Jewish law also. You give charity, you have to first give it to your community. Could be the old city of Jerusalem is considered everyone's community, and people who are living in say Jerusalem. But generally speaking, it's your community because you got to affect your environment. So the answer to the second question is yes, do your own thing. Fix yourself, fix your immediate circle. That creates a ripple effect that's going to create more and more. So yes, a communal effect is much greater than an individual. But the way to get the communal is by every individual taking care of their world. Now, let me give a second answer to humility. This is a very, very different approach, but also very, very important. The second answer is like this, and is like this. Moshe was able to see in every person how they were greater than him in something. That's incredible. That's really incredible.
For sure.
It really is. To be
Rabbi, really emphasize that again, because that is, we talk about getting close to Hashem.
Oh, it's
but
like a
if
key
we can
going
see,
in the lock,
that's the key.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Say it again.
So what Moshe was able to do was he was able to see how every single person was greater than he was at something. There was some aspect, and by the way, this has to be true, because if God created you, which he did, then there's something that you're doing in this world, otherwise you wouldn't be here. So there's something that you are better than the greatest at. Now, we don't usually think about it that way. So if Moshe is looking at, like himself and how great he is, and sees some person who's really great at one little tiny, seemingly minuscule thing, so that would not lead to humility. But Moshe built it up. And Moshe said, no, this person has this and this quality. And it really is, it's a key. I as many of you know, I'm recently retired from my synagogue, but the synagogue was built on that whole principle, which was that everyone is going to have a place that you can do something that other people can't do, including the rabbi. So every single person has something to offer. Now, and this is where it gets a little tricky. So we have Ronald's got his motorcycle back there, right? It's a nice bike. Now, so let's say, Ronald says, I love my bike, I have a great bike, but the bike last week had a big argument. Got into an argument. The engine said to the wheels, I'm more important than you are. And then the wheel said, yeah, but I'm more important than the screws that hold the wheels in. I'm the wheel. They got this big fight. So the screws that held the wheel together said, okay, but we're out of here. Bike doesn't go anyplace. It's one entity. So what's greater, the engine or the nuts and bolts that hold the wheel together? Well, it's a kind of an irrelevant question. Same way when you look at a body of a person, you may say the eyes are more important than the fingers, but you can't cut the finger off because it's one unit, which is why you could take the cells from one part of your body and build the whole body from that. That means that when you look at it and you start to say, it's not a question of, who's ultimately bigger or not. It's that every single person has some aspect that is their special purpose, their special quality, and that puts together to paint the entire picture. So if you have a giant, 10,000 piece jigsaw puzzle and you're missing one piece,
it's not complete. Yeah.
Worthless. So you don't get into the discussion, who's better, the engine or the wheels? It doesn't matter because a car ain't going nowhere without an engine and without wheels. So that was the second way to get humility. That's a very, the Muslim rabbis talked about this a lot. That's really a very important way to live your life, to focus on, I mentioned of Victor Miller one time here. I mentioned this last week. I mentioned twice, but I tell the same story twice. But another story of Victor Miller, which is that he had a booklet he wrote, just 10 small ways to attain greatness. And one thing he had was every day pick somebody you look at and see them as a divine aspect of God. So like, I don't know, you're going out, you're on the bus, whatever, and everyone looks funny, but if you start to say, wait a minute, this person's got something to them, and you start to see special things in other people, it changes you. Instead of thinking I'm the whole solution, you start realizing everyone has their place in the system. And the more you emphasize that, the greater you'll interact, the more you respect other people, and the more you'll be able to create actually community, because of that everyone's got their place. Everything has their place, and everything has their time.
Wow, well said. Rabbi,
Sandy,
can you take a comment from Germany?
Yes, please.
Okay, so Michael Weingart in Germany, who's watching us on Facebook, he asks, how can we overcome the animalistic part of our souls, which holds us up from making the best out of our talents? His second question, he says, study Torah or pray? Rhetorically.
So there are various ways that we have to do this battle, and it is a battle. It's a real battle,
and it never ends.
And you know how you know someone is losing the battle? When they tell you there's no battle. That's, the guy is losing. The person says, I don't see any problem here. I don't see any problem. That means that the guy is already being controlled, doesn't really realize what's going on. So there is a battle, and there are a number of steps. The first step is a very positive step, which is to see the greater good that comes from the other side. It's like this. Let's say my lower animalistic part wants this, and I'll give you a very crude example. Let's say a person wants to eat food that they know is not healthy for them, and they're stuck in that desire. If they really build up the image of healthy living, long life, being able to do greater things, they build up the positive will outweigh the negative. This is called the Yetzer Tov being stronger than the Yetzer Hara. So a person who's able to, if any desire, let's talk very bluntly. As that person is let's say they're looking at members of the opposite sex they shouldn't look at. So what happens right now is that the other side, if they feel like, wait a minute, this energy that I have, if I direct it properly, I will be happier. I'll make my wife or husband happier. I will be able to do all of these great things, which is going to be so much better than the negative. Then that itself, if you push that, you can be successful. That's step one. If that doesn't work, step two is then to learn Torah. Learning Torah now, and again, it doesn't mean you should learn Torah anyway. I'm just saying this is the technique that the sages tell us on to deal with the Yetzer Hara animal instincts, so to speak. So now learn Torah, because now when I learn truth and I know what's right, that affects me. Okay, knowing in your head this is right will affect the way you act. Okay, it just has to be that way. If you don't know, it's not going to go. If you learn it, and now you have the blessing of learning God's Torah, and it affects you, this is the right thing to do, that goes from the head to the heart. Okay? Now, that, if it still doesn't get control of the person, so then the next thing to do is say the Shema, which is a form of davening, but it's also here to get the focusing on there is one God who's controlling the world, and that's it. Push everything out. That's a very not the first two I gave you were more expansive and learning and easier. Third one is just to meditate on Shema. There's one creator, there's one source, everything else is not. If all these things have not succeeded, then it's the person should think about a day of death. Last resort. But the day of death goes and takes out a lot of the wind from a person's sails. So a person feels their animal inclination is going crazy, this and that. Well, then start to think, wait a minute. One day we're going to be dead. And what's going to happen then?
Isn't that the ultimate raising of one's consciousness is to be aware of your death? I mean, they say that if anything is going to work, that should work. And if that doesn't work, then you might be evil.
It's the last medicine, though, because it makes people. It's very strong medicines. The strong medicines do work, but there's some side effects to them also.
We have a couple of questions. Number one, Craig, and then Sandy. Craig says, world leaders today are causing a lot of our problems throughout the world. Are you saying that God will, and they are only chess pieces in God's hand, these world leaders? Are they causing the problems? Is this free choice? Could you do a quick explanation?
Great. Very, very, very important question. Very important question. And I'm going to make a distinction here. It's very important. I'm not sure the people from my synagogue are on today so much, but I said I didn't tell them. I forgot. I'm making somewhat of a distinction between the Jewish people and Noachides in a certain sense. What happens is that it's important for the Noachides to make sure the Jews are doing the right thing. Because a lot of times what happens is that if the Jewish people are not acting in the ideal way, sometimes there are mechanisms that go into place to get them to straighten out. And so what happens is like this, is that if every Jew is learning Torah, then doing the right thing, then that would affect the world tremendously. Sometimes you all have chosen to be a positive light in the world, but sometimes if the Jewish people are not acting the right way, there is a stick that becomes whatever nation tries to harm the Jewish people. So the answer is multifaceted. On one level, if we're acting correctly, then the forces that are involved in the world, the leaders, they will fall into line. If we create a vacuum where there is negative things, because we're not all doing the right thing, and here I'm putting the Jews and Noachites all together. If we're not doing the right thing, it creates a negative vacuum in the world, and there can be negative responses. Now, the leaders of the world are choosing to do bad things on their own. That is 100% correct. However, there is, especially in the sense of leaders, there is limited free will for leaders because they don't have the ability to destroy the world or do something on a grand scale that God doesn't want to happen. So on one level, it's happening as a negative response to spiritual flaws that we are creating in the system. If we're all acting right, first of all, we won't get terrible leaders. That's something you have to ask yourself a question. When you have leaders that are doing things that are very, very wrong, you have to say, well, how do these people become the leaders of our people? It's bizarre. It's truly bizarre. So it's easier to see in a democracy because apparently they've been elected by the people who don't mind that they act this way. But whether it's a democracy or not a democracy, the leaders are leading the people that they are part of. So when the people get their act together, they merit to get better leaders. Very, very important here. I don't know. I don't get too political, but if I go through, I can tell you exactly why we have the leaders we have. Exactly. I could show you precisely what it is that we're doing wrong, which leads to certain types of leaders. It's really fairly obvious. It's a few deeper points. But so the answer to the question is like this, is that there are spiritual factors that are the underpinnings and the deeper reasons why things are happening. When that vacuum is created, we often will get the leaders that are not good, and they will decide things on their own free will that are bad. And God will move the system to control it, that it will still bring out what he wants to come out, but it is in a negative response because we've created certain negative consequences from our actions. So it's a blend. And by the way, Craig, this is one of the deepest thing, and this is where you very often get like people who are very shallow and sort of religious leaders who say things like, "This happened because of this." If you're not a prophet, you don't know why the thing happened. If you're a prophet, you could say, the prophets would say, "This happened because you did this." Okay, but if you're not, you don't know. You can possibly some ideas. You don't know exactly. The deepest thing is how God moves the world. We have free will. We're causing things, but we can't go against what he's going to want to bring out. That's not possible. No one could destroy the world. The world's not going to be blown up in 12 years, whether or not you have a Keystone Pipeline or not. It's not. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't take care of the environment. Of course you should. But to believe that you have that power to blow the world up in this time is not. Now, so that's why nuclear, we're talking potentially, God forbid, if people don't get a little bit of intelligence here and deal with things properly, we could be facing a nuclear situation, which is very, very disastrous. We know the prophets did talk about a nuclear situation. The descriptions in Zechariah could not be understood if you didn't understand nuclear power. How people understood the ideas of flesh falling off their faces. I mean, without understanding nuclear energy, when the prophet said it thousands of years ago, how did people make any sense of it? So there is this possibility, God forbid. The thing is that our actions create the environment for it. The bad leaders will be a result of the negative actions of whatever the people are. They will try to use their free will to create what they want. And on that level, God is still directing their free will, that they don't have the free will to bring it to where they actually want to, but it'll be tailored to what needs to happen in the world.
That was a very, very well laid out description. And the radio anchor in my mind wants to continue on the conversation, but Sandy here has another question that we want to add to it. So Sandy, go ahead.
This goes back to the humility of Moses. And correct me if I'm wrong or if I'm making a wrong interpretation or assumption here, but in this week's portion, Moses and Aaron get into a dispute about whether to eat a certain offering or not. And it seems like it gets kind of heated. But after Aaron talks to Moses about it, Moses concedes Aaron is correct. And it just, to me, I was thinking about that in his humility. He could have taken the attitude, hey, who went up on Mount Sinai? Who got this directly from God? I'm the one who should know this. But no, he listened to somebody else and conceded that he had forgotten that or he was wrong on that. So I thought that was I saw that as an example of his humility.
100%. And it's a significant moment there. The argument, it wasn't heated as a personal thing, but it was heated in the sense that Moshe understood something, and Aaron there is two parts in the Torah. This is the part that's with the written Torah that God gives us, and then you have what's called the oral Torah, which is the sages of Israel have to extrapolate and understand. So, for example, in the Bible, it doesn't say you can't use electricity on Shabbos. The Jewish people we don't use electricity. Why not? Well, it says fire, but you have to extrapolate. Well, is electricity called fire? And when electricity was discovered, there were thousands and thousands of books that came out discussing this, and the sages of Israel had to come up with the understanding of how to apply God's Torah. So Aaron was doing that. Aaron was applying the appropriate logic, and Moshe saw it. And he readily admitted it. But I want to tell you something that's even on your point, Sandy, that's even more amazing. Not because Moshe did the same thing, but I want to add one piece to what you're saying, which is so fascinating. I mentioned Rav Chaim Kanievsky, who was the leading sage of Israel, just passed away. He was buried today. So he was a leader living in a city called Bnei Brak. Bnei Brak is a city not far from Tel Aviv, but a lot holier than Tel Aviv. Before him, there were other leaders in that city. That were some of the main leaders of the Jewish world, because it's a very strong learning center in Israel. And there was one rabbi who was the leader of the generation in the 80s. Passed away in the 80s, I guess, 70s, 80s. His name was Rav Shach. He used to give a class in front of 2,000 people. We lived in Jerusalem, but I remember going there to hear, because you had to go hear Rav Shach sometimes here. So now, once a week, he'd give the class in front of the 2,000 people. He gets up there and he presents the beginning of the class for the week. And one young student picks his hand and says, I have a question based on something Maimonides said right here. The rabbi thinks about it. And in front of 2,000 people, he goes, that's a great question. I didn't have an answer. He closed his book and he walked off. Now, I want to explain to you how great that is. As a rabbi that doesn't come up to his ankles, you could, if you know what you're doing, you could flip what the student said 100 different ways. He could have answered the student so well, the student would have not even realized he wasn't answered, because he had all the information, but it wasn't true. And he knew it was a question. He wanted to save face. He could have done it so easily by just arguing and going back and forth and saying things in a way the student would have been twisted in his mind. The student wouldn't even know what he even asked in the end. But it wasn't true. So his humility said, I'm walking off. So that's right. Moshe, right? Moshe he took it. So he thought about it. You're right. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's like we see this. It's such an important trait, because it's somebody says to you, you got this problem. What do you say? You got worse problems. You're telling me, you know who you are? That's our first response. So to be an honest person, to hear it and to admit it, that's a sign of a person who's a person of truth and a person who's humble. Great point, Sandy. I like that.
Sandy, was that answered properly for you?
Yes, and you did remind me, I read in the commentary on that was, I believe it said the first example that of using the oral Torah to interpret the written Torah, that Aaron was the first one who did that.
That's what I was referring to. That's exactly what I was referring to. It's why it's the half point in the Torah, in the words of the Torah. It's because it's a shift now, because you need both parts. You need the part of the written Torah, which is Moshe, and then Aaron applies that. And that's the way the system works. God gave us, without the sages to create the application, we can't function.
So maybe we should have a class on the art and practice of humility. That would be an interesting subject, wouldn't it? It's like, hey, there is a practice of humility, and that's an amazing thing. Anybody else? Any comments from somebody or questions from someone that has not put anything out so far? We're 10 minutes away from the top of the hour, and usually here we like to really take a break and to get some questions or comments. Anybody else?
I have a question, a small
Atalo?
question. Yes. We talked, you gave your first class about Mashiach, about the Messianic times, and I have this thing that I didn't have a chance to ask before. I wanted to make sure if the Jews, they all repent and everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, can there be a Messianic time without any wars? Or does it have to be wars? That's I'm sorry, you probably already answered that before. Just I didn't get.
No, it's a great question. I didn't. I said it in passing, but I want to flesh it out a little bit more. So, like this, the answer is definitely yes. The answer is yes. Now, you have a question. Wait a minute. What happens to the prophecies of the wars? So, and this is what we don't understand. This is why, like, a lot of times you have to see when the rabbi is giving a class on Mashiach, if he starts to tell you this is what's going to happen, this is what's going to happen, he doesn't know what he's talking about. So I just gave you possibilities. Why? Because as Maimonides says, you're not going to know until you look backwards and you see retroactively that's what happened. You can't know. So theoretically, what would I love to see? I'd love to see everyone getting their act together. I don't know if it's going to be like this, and that World War II turns out to be the War of Gog and Magog. I'm not saying the Great War. Is it? Will it be? I don't know. But like, and I'm not saying this is true because I don't know. But there is this incredible what's the word? I forgot the word. I forgot the word conflagration. I forgot when you combine things. I forgot the word.
Yeah, conflagration.
Conflagration, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of conflagration that happens between our free will and God's running the show and directing the show, and we have free will, and He's still directing the show. So now, when you look at it, you say, "Wait a minute, what came out of World War II?" Clearly, historically, the state of Israel came out of it, in a strange way, because like all of a sudden, like they had this UN vote, and Russia and America voted for Israel. It's like crazy, and everyone, all these things just transpired. Now, that again was God putting into the minds of leaders. So right now, everyone lives in a blip of time, and it's very hard to get a bigger perspective. So theoretically, could that be if we did tshuva today and Mashiach came out of tshuva, could it then be that past war was the war that led to Israel and the return to Zion? Yeah. But we're in the history right now, so we don't know while we're in it what's going to be. We know that not one word that God said in the prophets will come back not happening. It'll happen. But it'll all happen in a way that is, and now I'll give you an analogy to imagine this a second. Imagine you have like a path, different paths that could open. And every path that you take, it could open another millions of pathways. So imagine we take this route. If we take this route, then these paths open. That route, that path's open. Same thing in a person's life. You made decisions. You could have been a doctor, in your 20s, so not to be a doctor, so I had to be this. So now, at a certain point, that's not the pathway, but you have other pathways that are still going to play out. So if we fix ourselves up, and if we do tshuva right now, it can come without the wars. There's still a process about the wars. Yeah, those will be fulfilled in other things, in other ways that when we look back retroactively, we can say, oh, that's what it was referring to. I didn't know when I was in the midst of it. Did that answer your question?
That
So it's a definite yes. It can happen without the wars. It can happen without the terrible things. And as far as what all the prophets will be referring to. Now, there's one more piece to that. Let me just add one other thing that could also be. There's a principle that when a prophet says a positive prophecy, it has to happen. A negative prophecy does not have to happen.
right.
That's a very important rule to understand.
Right. Yes.
So what happens is that, yes, it could be that the prophet says, but, and we have cases like that in the Torah where there was a prophecy, just famous story of when Jonah went to Nineveh.
Right.
Nineveh
They
was
repented.
turned over. Now, a deeper sense is when Nineveh was turned over, it did get turned over. Not turned over, destroyed, it got turned over by now being a new place, a good place. But that's a deeper point. So the answer to the question is yes, it could happen throughout without the wars, and many things that have happened through history can take their role in this story of the unfolding of Mashiach that we wouldn't have understood they had that role because it changed based on our free will.
Awesome. Rabbi, I really appreciate your time. Dan, let me just do one. Hold on. Talo, you had something?
Just, I had a little small, insignificant question.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay. It's we're talking about big stuff, but I was wondering, what about sports? You know, games and all that. What free will and God's will? How does that affect, let's say, a race, a game, all that stuff? That's small stuff like that. I always had that question, but I didn't have the courage to ask something like that.
It's
a lot are fixed, rigged.
It's rigged, right? So it's a good question. Actually, it is a good question. I'll tell you why it's a very good question. I'll tell you why it's a very good question. I'll tell you the deep answer. I'll give you the more basic answer. The deep answer is like this: the Greeks had a belief that God created the world, but he's not involved in the world. Or theories. One is that the world was eternal and God was with the world in the beginning, however they had it, but they had a belief that God is not involved in the world. Now, why they think God was not involved in the world? So they said, well, God is so lofty, how is he involved in these small minutiae of things? That was their rationale. Now, there's a tremendous mistake with that because it means that we think God's wisdom is our wisdom. We don't understand God's thoughts at all. How he controls and knows every single thing and moves every single thing. So that's not like harder for God to do. It's not like knowing it's like if I would think, it's for me to keep track of like how that bug can walk here, this and that, it's very hard. But God's thinking and wisdom, we can't fathom it anyway. So his thoughts are not our thoughts. We have no way. So God knows and is involved in everything in that sense. Now, there is something called like animals, for example, have an oversight that's called more general. Doesn't mean that God doesn't know what's happening to each bird, but it means their function is their species.
Categorically.
Their function is a species. Doesn't mean, of course, he knows that this bird's going to fall and die. But
the ducks fly here to Canada.
Yeah, that's right. But a human being is different because human being has a purpose. So, could it be, does God know who's going to win the game? Of course he does. How does he want to structure it? Yeah, I don't know. But if you're a human being and it has an effect on you, which it probably does, this guy is going to get rich from it. This guy's going to get poor from it. This guy's going to get into a fight with his wife. This guy's going to, have his kid, love him now. So there are effects. There are effects that people go through. So yes, there is it doesn't mean God's rooting for a team, obviously.
Do you get an edge?
What?
Do you get an edge? A lot of teams, I used to play football, a lot of teams pray before the game.
It's have a rabbi in every team, right? So yeah, but honestly, I think if a person would pray, I guess they would have. I'm sure they'd have a better chance to win. It says even if a thief prays before he steals, he could end up maybe getting some assistance, which is not good. But even if a thief can, certainly a sports player can. So the answer to the question is, in a certain sense, although it may have less significance, but God knows, and in a certain sense is involved in every aspect of the world. In the animals, more generally, in the human beings, which is going to have an effect on them in a more direct way.
Yeah.
How does that affect fairness? If God is on one side of
No. Okay, so it doesn't mean God's saying this team's going to win. That team's going to win. It doesn't mean that. It means that you could have these are the teams and God says, let them play out, and this is their free will. And I know this team is going to win, and He's not changing it. Could there be a situation where He would want to change it for some reason, which shouldn't be? That could be, but I don't know why. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine why it would be. I guess only how it affects people in their lives. So theoretically, it should be all. Let's give you an example another way. If a person knows how to, build a wall. Okay, I know I'm a builder. I know how to build a wall. So God doesn't now have to tell me each brick. I have to have a special divine message. The brick goes into place. I know how to build the wall. He's given me the power. He's given me the system, and He's allowing that reality to happen. Same thing with two teams. They each have their skills, and I don't know that any team would merit a miraculous intervention to change the allowances that God gave them for each side. Could it be? Yeah, it could be. But I don't know that it would be like that. It doesn't have to be the same way that nature works because God allows it to work, right? Nature, I build because these are the rules and the system that God, it's still Him running the world, but it's me putting a brick here and a brick here and a brick there. So He gave these guys the skills. They have nature power. Team X can beat Team Y. So therefore, He will allow the system to work, and Team X will beat Team Y if they are better or they play better, because that's the nature of the system. I don't mean God's supernaturally picking a team. He's allowing nature to take its path, which the victory in the team goes by skill, heart, energy. Now, sometimes there are other things that happen. So I can't say that God would not, from some ever. Who knows? We can't say anything what God does. But is it theoretically possible that there's a person or a team that God wants to win, even though maybe they shouldn't? I guess possible. But how is
favorable balance?
What?
Yeah, Rabbi, we're getting ready to wrap up the end because we're 4 minutes after the hour.
Yeah.
Let me just say this. For sure, that the direction of the world and free will is a very complicated perspective. And that is, it's like that game that you play as a kid. You drop a little plastic coin and it drops through all of this maze of little nails on a board, and it ultimately ends down into a certain place. Are you familiar with that, Atalo? Plinko? Yeah. So the idea is that the coin is dropped, the journey starts, and it jumps around. But ultimately, everything is going to work out for the purpose of Hashem. And some are good, some things are bad, some things are awkward, some things are upside down. But the whole point is we all need to know that Hashem is in control. and it's all right. The micro details of everything is too complicated for us to understand. How about the team's spiritual level? How about the team's morality level? I mean, it would blow your mind to get into that. So let's leave that to Hashem. So Dan, go ahead.
I just want to get this is not a shameless plug, but if you do want to see in my book, I have a book called "Where Heavens Kiss the Earth." I have a whole chapter going through this.
Wow,
good.
I go through this in great detail.
So where can we get that book?
At Amazon, "Where the Heavens Kiss the Earth."
Where the heavens?
Where the heavens kiss the earth. Mystical
Rabbi,
personal growth.
Yeah, Rabbi Karmi Ingber.
Rabbi Karmi Ingber, Karmi Ingber. You get on Amazon. I got a whole chapter on what you just asked, Talia.
So guys, do me a favor. We're going to end the class right now because I want to talk with Rabbi Karmi and Dan and Dennis. So we're going to go ahead and end the class early tonight because normally we have Q&A. Plus, I have to see my wife off. She's going to go to work, so I don't want to leave the house without me saying goodbye to her. Okay, guys.
All right, I'm gonna
stay on.
I'm gonna end the broadcast to the Noahide World Center social media pages. Thanks for coming. Hashem willing, we'll be back again next week if Rabbi Ingber's up to it. Yes. Right on. Okay, he gives us the thumbs up. So yeah, tentatively same time next week, folks. We hope to see you and be prepared if you have some questions that you got to get an answer to. Only place to go is a Torah scholar, and Rabbi Ingber's allowed this opportunity for some open sessions. So if you got some deep questions and you need an answer, please come back next week, and we'll see you then. Have a wonderful, wonderful week, everybody. Bye for now.